Hey everyone, welcome to tonight's program. To start off tonight's program, I'm going to lead with the land acknowledgement. The Portland Art Museum recognizes and honors the indigenous peoples of this region. These include the Willamette Tumwater, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Motlala, Multnomah, and Watlala Chinook peoples, and the Tualatin Kalapuya, who today are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and many other Native communities who made their homes along the Columbia River. We also want to recognize that Portland today is a community of many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. So welcome to tonight's program. My name is Jaleesa Johnston. I am head of public programs and engagement at the museum, and I would like to lead with my verbal description. Verbal descriptions are an accessibility tool that we try to practice here at the museum. It is a way to help visitors who can't see the screen envision who each speaker is. So again, my name is Jaleesa. I am a Black woman wearing black rimmed glasses. I have black hair that's in a braid. I'm wearing silver hoop earrings and I have on a green hoodie. And I'm sitting in, I guess I would describe this as like a gray kind of beige room. And that is my description. And I'd like to welcome everyone. And I just want to go over a few housekeeping basic information just to help you better enjoy tonight's program. So first, I want to bring your attention to this slide. We have captions available. So these are automated real-time captions. Please keep in mind that because they're automated, they're not going to always be accurate. There's going to be some like names and words that the caption's not going to get correctly. But the tool is still very helpful. So to access these, if you're joining us on Zoom, you can click the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of the Zoom window and choose Show Captions. Once on, you can click the caption box and your cursor and move it around the screen. And if you're joining us on Facebook, captions can be turned on by clicking the settings gear icon on Facebook Live and choosing captions. And another thing that I would also like to bring your attention to is that we have ASL interpreters tonight. And I would like to thank our interpreters for the evening, Sarika Metha and Gregorio Nieto. Thank you for being here today and helping us with accessibility this evening. And finally, for questions, I'm sure that this conversation is going to bring up a lot of interesting questions. If you have one and you're on Zoom, please put them in the Q&A. And if you're joining us on Facebook, just enter your questions into the chat and my colleague will help feed them over to us here on Zoom so that we can get to your questions. And other than that, I think those are all of the housekeeping things and we can move on with the program. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I would like to kick it over to Kathleen Ash Milby, our curator of Native American art here at the museum, to introduce the artists and the moderator for tonight's program.
Okay, everyone. I don't see my image on the screen yet, but I am Kathleen Ash Milby. I am the curator of Native American art at the Portland Art Museum and a member of the Navajo Nation. I would describe, let's see, here we go. Now I understand. There I am. All right, so I am sitting also in a beige room in front of some horizontal blinds. I am wearing blue rimmed glasses. I have short gray and brown hair, and I'm wearing a black top with a turquoise colored necklace. I'm really happy to be with you here tonight to talk, to introduce you to these artists who are in the show that I organized at the Portland Art Museum titled Mesh. This exhibition recently opened and is on the fourth floor of our Center for Modern and Contemporary Art wing. When I first started organizing this exhibition, I was really looking at a number of artists who are less known earlier in their career and got very excited by the work of these four who we're talking to here tonight. I didn't start organizing the exhibition as a thematic show, but it became clear pretty early on that there was this thread of interest in current events and really urgent social issues that was emerging in their work, and that their work was really acting as a form of activism. And I'm really excited that we're able to have these artists, and I'm very excited to see this type of subject emerging in the field right now, because I think that it's really important to have artists out there bringing attention to some of these issues in a way that you don't always get from traditional news sources and things like that. So the four artists are Kayla Farrell Smith, who is a Klamath Modoc artist who lives in Modoc Point, Oregon. Lynette Houses is based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She is Chiricahua Apache and a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe with Diné and Taos Pueblo heritage. Laihua Uakea is a Mahu mixed Native Hawaiian interdisciplinary artist from the Big Island of Hawaii who lives in Seattle, Washington. And Leah Rose Kolakowski, who is a member of the Keweenaw Bay Ojibwa tribe and lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So for tonight's discussion, we invited a guest moderator, and it is really my pleasure to introduce Wanda Nanabush. She is an Anishinaabe curator, author, scholar, and community organizer from the Beausoleil First Nation. Currently, she is the inaugural curator of Indigenous art and co-head of the Indigenous and Canadian Art Department at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto. Nanabush is the founder of Abakwad, It Clears After a Storm, an annual Indigenous-led conversation on Indigenous art. Her latest exhibition, a retrospective of Anishinaabe Saulteaux contemporary artist Robert Houle, will be opening in December, titled Robert Houle, Red is Beautiful. I am so excited that Wanda agreed to join us tonight. She is someone who I respect deeply and has been very active in the Native art world in Canada. And I'm delighted that we can have her here to take us on this journey with these artists. So Wanda, I leave it to you.
Miigwech, Kathleen, thank you. I send all the respect and love right back to you. I wanted to start with and I would imagine that all of our nations have ways of introducing ourselves that's different than a bio. So I would actually like to start with that and have each of us go around and introduce ourselves in whatever way you feel comfortable. As Anishinaabe Kwe, we would say, I'm Wanda Nanabush. I'm from Chimnasing, and I am Wolf Clan, and I come from a long line of Nanabushes who all have really big noses. So speaking of description, I should have described myself. I do not have a big nose because my mother's family is part of the McHughes, and they have little noses, little niche noses. I have black hair and with a few sexy grays coming in. I look way younger than I am. I have these beautiful porcupine quill earrings that I bought in New York when they did the first Lenape powwow, which made me cry. And then I have a gray dress on that looks black in this light. And behind me is this beautiful hide and hair artwork by Robert Houle. It's probably enough, eh? Yeah, so that's who I am. So I thought we would go around and each of us would introduce ourselves in our own way. So let's start with Kayla. And you choose the next.
Sabkecha Wanda. Waxlisi, Gaustasis Kaila, Nua Uksakini, Nua Mudakni. Maklisi in Klamath is like, what's up when you see another Klamath person? So what's happening? My name is Kaila Farrell Smith, and I'm a member of the Klamath tribes, the Klamath, Modoc, and Yahooskin Paiute nations in so-called Southern Oregon. It's wonderful to be here with you all. And I have dark brown hair, Native American woman. I have gold aviator glasses, some big beaded earrings that are turquoise and have missing and murdered Indigenous women handprint on the face. And I'm wearing a blue jumper, and I live in a log house, and there's a fire burning behind me. And I'll pass it to Lynette.
Yeah, thank you, Kyla. Dagote Yate, my name is Lynette Houses. I am Chiricahua Apache of the San Carlos Apache Nation in Arizona. I am also Diné and Taos Pueblo. In my Diné way, I am Ashihi clan for my Diné relatives. This is the way we introduce ourselves. That is Salt Clan. I'm an artist and I am currently based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, specializing in murals. And it's great to be here. And my descriptive, I am a Native American woman. I have long black hair and it is worn straight today. And I have some beaded long earrings on as well. And I have a floral multicolored shirt on, and the background, I am sitting in my home with two black and white and silver paintings that I have done. Thank you for having me. Yeah. And I'll pass it to Leah.
Bonjour, my name is Leah Rose Kolakowski. I'm from Kitchi Wikwidong, which is also known as Keweenaw Bay, Baraga, Michigan. I currently live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I've lived here about 4 years now. The way I look, I'm a Native woman. I have shoulder length black hair, a striped turtleneck sweater on, and I'm wearing little jingle earrings. I'm sitting in my living room with some furniture and a Christmas tree behind me. And I'm super happy to be here. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your names correctly, so I don't want to mess it up.
It's all good. My name is Lehua Uakea, Oao Lehua Uakea. He Hawaii au, he hamo na kapau. No papa I ko makamoku ke ave mai au. I ke Yamanava, no hoau maka Seattle, I know ko po'e Duwamish. My name is Lehua Uakea. I am Native Hawaiian. I am from Papai'iko on the Big Island originally, but right now I live in Seattle. And I am a student of kapa, which is bark cloth. And I guess it's kind of hard to see right now because it's in a dark place, but I am a Mahu non-binary Native Hawaiian individual with long brown hair, a black sweatshirt that says land back. And I am sitting in a truck at night. So mahalo for being here.
I love a good trek. Who doesn't? Thank you all. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with each of you. I wanted to start with a question for each of us. When I was reading your bios, I noticed that each of you mentioned mentors or folks that you're collaborating with, which I thought was actually really, really progressive, and I think speaks to our sense of kinship and how we honor others. And I've been thinking about this a lot in my work and constantly naming people whose ideas that I've borrowed or who I'm working with or elders that I'm thinking about. It's not always easy, but I really love that you've all forefronted that. And I wondered if each of you could talk about who you've mentioned and why they are important. Let's start with Lynette. to start somewhere else. So I want to always start with the same person. And then each of you choose the next.
Okay, talking about our mentors, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my mentor, I worked with through the Native Arts and Culture Foundation. I worked with as an apprentice under artist Nani Chacon, Nanaba Chacon, Chicano Dene muralist, who also lives here in Albuquerque, who has extensive work in public art fields, coming from a graffiti background. So we got to work on, for a year, like 4 of her murals, and it was quite an amazing experience. And I love that you mentioned elders, because that's the way I thought about my mentor, is that was our modern day elder, right? And in that respect, we learned so much wisdom from them, and the importance of sharing this wisdom and not keeping it for yourselves, and sharing it with the community. And that's what we do in the mural field, is we share these gifts with them, but also sharing and keeping this knowledge going was a very important thing with us. And not only that, working with a mentor really built a sense of sisterhood and kinship, a sense of belonging and acceptance, acknowledgement of your work and where you're going, and coming into this art realm of just being accepted by somebody who has already gone through it, who has the experience and the wisdom and the knowledge, and who has invited you to learn under them, was such an honor, really. So I thought about my my mentor, Nani, as my elder, really. And we're not really too far apart as in age-wise. I believe we're 5 years difference. And so, but I approached it in that way, in that respectful way of, that's kind of how it was for me. And really, it was just building relationships. For me, going out here, being a Native American muralist, I really felt alone in navigating the art world, the Native art world and the art world. And so it was really an awesome opportunity for me to learn things and to come into this world in a good way, and leave with confidence.
Beautiful. Okay, you get to choose who has to answer next. We share this.
I'll go with Kyla.
Awesome. Yeah, it is my name does have a guttural stop, so it's Kaila, and sometimes it's spelled G with an apostrophe E-E-L-A, like Kaila. And so Kaila, my name is the Klamath word from our origin story, which means earth, land, and creation. So I'll just share that about my namesake. And yeah, I really love that we're starting this discussion talking about mentorship, collaboration, and that at the core is really what I was searching for as in my professional artistic kind of development over many years. And so I met my mentor that I mentored with, Sharad Yonker, who's a Cusco Keel carver, printmaker. He's got all the good dad jokes. And I've worked with Sharad for many, many years. And I met Sharad, I think it was when I started a graduate program in around 2011 at Pacific Northwest College of Art. And I had training in Western fine arts, specifically painting. I'm a painter. And went to school and studied in Europe and studied in Italy. I lived in Germany for 4 years. So a lot of my teenage years was really immersed in Western art history. And so I wasn't, because of here in Oregon, because of termination, relocation, boarding schools, we've been removed from our culture pretty drastically, at least. And that's my father's experience. And so I also want to mention my father, the late Alfred Leo Smith, and his court case, Smith versus Oregon, which was the Native American Freedom of Religion Amendment Act of 1994 that I grew up during that case. So kind of my identity as an activist and doing that work is really rooted in my father's life and the work he did. So meeting Sherrod, though, it was great. So it was with a camp called Journeys in Creativity, which is a native high school pre-college art camp from ages 15 and 19. So I mentored in that program. I was a mentor in that program for about 5 years. So I taught a lot of students, including his daughter, Kalea Yonker, who I still am in a mentorship relationship with. And that is also through this program. So this was the first time I started, first time I wove a basket or worked with indigenous materials and started learning about that and carving. And so these are all things that it was my first time in my 30s that I was experiencing that. And so that's where I met Pat Courtney Gold, who was my first mentorship was with Pat. And Pat is just a brilliant elder, and she's so funny and so radical. And you should, if you have the chance, she teaches a class about the matriarch's memories of when Lewis and Clark came bumbling down the Columbia River on what she wouldn't even call logs. So, or wouldn't even call it canoe, they were like logs. So Pat, it was really wonderful to be in that year-long mentorship, and that really transformed my painting practice into moving and bringing in collecting and harvesting my own land back materials, which are on view in this exhibition. And I'll pass it to Lehuahuakea.
Thanks, Kaila. So in this exhibition, I kind of pay, my respects to two of my mentors and teachers that I've been working with over the last couple of years. The first that I'll mention is Brenda Mallory, who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And she and I have been working together officially through the NACF Mentor and Apprentice program over the last year and a half or so, and we've continued our relationship beyond the program itself. And she's been very instrumental in helping me understand the ins and outs of the art world, so to speak. Just being a young emerging artist, I think that's been very monumental in getting opportunities and understanding how art taxes work and how to do my paperwork and keep track of sales and things like that, and understanding the business side of my work. Even though our work is very different media wise, we do address a lot of the same kind of concepts, and so she and I kind of were able to meet each other on that level and find resonance in each other's practices. And then my other mentor, who is my kappa teacher, my bark cloth kumu, I call him kumu or uncle. His name is Wesley Sen, but I just call him Uncle Wes. And he is my my mentor for learning how to make kapa, which is a traditional native Hawaiian textile made from the bark of paper mulberry trees. And so it's a very labor intensive process that you really have to learn in person. And once I started making the tools to decorate this cloth, I realized that I really need to learn how to make the cloth itself. And so about 3 years ago, I started learning with Uncle West after my grandma ran into him again at a craft fair on the Big Island, and they instantly recognized each other after 50 or 60 years because she was his babysitter when she was a teenager. And so long story short, she told him what I was doing at PNCA at the time, and he's a master kapa maker and weaver and cultural practitioner back home. And so he said whenever Lehua is ready, put us in touch. And so that's my source of knowledge for right now. So I really respect both of them in helping me get to where my practice is now and continually showing me new things to learn. And I will pass it to Leah.
Hi. I would say my biggest influence and mentor has been Chimwavy photographer Caro Romero. I actually met her my first trip to Santa Fe, New Mexico ever. I got some money from dancing at powwows one summer, and a friend of mine told me, "Have you ever heard of the Santa Fe Indian Market?" And I was like, "No." So I bought a ticket down here and I had a bunch of my prints and I went to all the artist booths and gave away my prints. And that was when I met Kara and her work. She just tells these really fantastic stories with the way she sets up her pieces. She does a lot of figural work. She photographs tribes from all over. And we really formed a friendship on that very first meeting. And I just kept in contact with her. I went to her art openings and would always talk to her during like the markets and the art shows that I would see her at. And I guess it made a good impression because she asked me to be her mentor for the Native Art and Culture Foundation mentor apprenticeship. And we have a very different way of photographing. She is very precise and really sets everything up and has a very specific thing she says with each of her images. While up until that point, I was more spontaneous, more photo documentary style. I was just kind of photographing my life as it was happening. Just working with her and working alongside of her, I've learned a lot of technical advances. And also she's made me really think about storytelling a lot more. And although we're from totally different tribes, like opposite sides of Turtle Island, we still have a lot that in common as far as how we want to sort of break stereotypes and photograph Native people in a way that's more modern and contemporary and not as historical. But she's been a huge inspiration and mentor and just guide. We're still good friends today. And I work with her a few times a year still.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know, you've all kind of mentioned mentorship, but then also the art world in this kind of way that's like this space that we have to enter into. What is this weird universe? How strange is this? Some folks like enter it so comfortably. You know, if you go to art school and you have a lot of people in your family who are artists, like there's some ways it can be paved that's really smooth, and then other ways it's really not smooth. And then also sometimes our practice or the way we think about the world or the way we want to do things can make it feel alien in itself. And I think we can admit it's a very white world still. But something I was thinking about along those lines, also in relation to the fact that you all work outside of the arts as well. Like you don't, it's not like you were just sitting there, went to art school, came out of art school, making work, and that's your entire universe. So do you find, like I have found myself when I was in doing a movement for 3 years, you know, organizing a movement for 3 years, but I also am in the arts. Those two worlds often were never in the same places. So folks that I would be at a gallery talking to, and then folks that I'd be yelling at through the microphone, you know, weren't the same people. But then as it went along, they started coming to each thing. And so uncomfortably, you know, like all these folks in the street were suddenly in a gallery, and then all the other gallery folks were suddenly on the street. And so it was really interesting to me to realize it was also me, that I separated myself into two parts. I spoke differently in both places. I said different things. I talked to, you know what I mean? Like different parts of me came out. And so I had to start integrating myself into one person that could always speak, you know, to both spaces. I'm saying two, but it's actually more complicated than that. But I was wondering if each of you have had experiences like this, or how you address it, or what you think about it. Any kind of entry point that you want into the story that I told. And let's start with you, Lehua Kea.
Yeah, and you can just call me Lehua too.
Yeah, well, I'd rather learn how to say it properly eventually.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, just because you know, being Native people, we're often excluded from spaces like galleries or institutions like museums. And that goes with our communities, our families. A lot of us do feel like those spaces aren't intended for us, or we don't belong there, we're not welcome there, and or we're not good enough to be there. And I think there's a lot of those feelings around in the Pacific Islander community as well. And like you were saying too, like you had to talk different, or you found yourself speaking different, or different parts of yourself came out. I totally have had a similar experience myself. With the code switching, you know, different, my pidgin accent kind of like drops off when I do things like this, or you know, it comes back as soon as I see my grandma, or like pick up the phone and talk to my family. And it's interesting trying to merge these two different parts of yourself together, and being born in Portland but raised in Hawaii, and then coming back to Oregon for high school and college. Like it was like a whiplash, like which part of myself do I put on the show as? And then stepping into the art world, where you're constantly asked to present yourself, to speak on your work, to show your work and show your identity through your work. That brings the conversation around again. You know, you're faced with that choice to either pick and choose or to blend the two. And over the last, I want to say, year and a half, I've seen my community come through, and I've created spaces for them to do so and to be in a gallery space. And so you have like locals from back home who are coming into like gallery spaces and museum spaces, who are like kind of like reluctant or like on edge about it at first, feeling uneasy, like what am I doing here, what do I do here, how do I act? But I think being able to share my platform in that way and elevate their stories when it's possible, it has been healing for me in regards to merging these two very different worlds of myself, but bringing them together, because I mean, that's kind of the path that I was born into. So it's been a powerful healing experience, not just for myself, but for my community too, I think.
Totally.
I'll pass it to Kaila.
Safkecha Lehuahuakea. I think I'm saying it right.
Yeah, Lehua Uakea.
Lehuahuakea. Excellent. Yeah, thank you for kind of prompting this question. It's I have a lot to say, a lot of kind of emotions, specifically in regards to my work in Portland, and also why I left Portland and moved back to my ancestral homelands 3 years ago. So for me, I went to high school in Germany on American Air Force Base through a Dodd school, and that's where I met my first art teacher. It was funny because I was like in this art history, or U.S. history class that was just. So this starts way back, actually. My mom, I think it was because of my mother's experience in education, kind of dealing with feminism, being talked down to by like male professors. My father's experience, obviously going through the boarding school system all across Oregon and into Stewart Indian School in Carson City, Nevada. And yeah, US military. My dad went to World War II. So there's like this, I think, so my mom created basically an alternative elementary school for me. So I was not raised, like the decolonizing stuff wasn't a big thing for me because I didn't get assimilated right into the US kind of imperial education. So by the time I got to high school, I found my art teacher. And so I applied. I knew I want to go to art school. And so I was like kind of on that trajectory at a very young age. By the time I got back to Eugene, I applied to all these art schools and I got a full ride scholarship to Pacific Northwest College of Art. So I kind of dove right in. I'd already been traveling a lot. And so like I was saying, this is like the year 2000. So I graduated from undergrad in 2004. So during that time, the Iraq war started. It's funny because all of my research is actually going right back to like that 2003, which I can get into a little bit later. But so I graduated 2004 and I was just super uber grossed out by the art world. I didn't like the competition that was bred in these schools. but it was my dream. I've always wanted to, I've always had a studio. Both my parents were artists, but ended up doing social work. So, and I kind of fell into that as well. So I ended up going right into environmental activism at the age of 21. I left the art world and I ended up becoming an organizer. So I've been a grassroots organizer and environmental activist like since 2004 in Portland. And so that also started with anti-war marches yeah, and so by the time then I realized that that doesn't do anything either. The nonprofit industrial complex is also like a huge waste of time. So I saw some meme that was like, talk about burnout, but it was like, we're not calling it burnout anymore, it's called exploitation. I was definitely exploited for many years. Not hitting the streets, talking to people, signing petitions, and then another dude gets into office and undoes everything that you just worked for. So I was like, maybe I should go back to the art. And so I applied and got into grad school, eventually ended up going to Portland State University because my mom works at the University of Oregon, so we have like a discount. And my father was extremely elderly and was going through dementia. So like leaving the state was never an option for me. I needed to be home and close to my father and my family. And so he passed away right after my graduation from getting my master's degree. And then I, did the residency thing. And then for about 4 years, and that's how I was able to produce a series of work, because I was like teaching, I went through these diversity programs in Portland Community College, realized I didn't want that to be my trajectory. But yeah, it's all of this is like figuring out how to be a business person, right? Like nobody teaches you that in art school. And so this mentorship program, I think, is really powerful for that, in offering that, like Lehua Hokea mentioned that, like even just a lot of people don't talk about that. Like you have to figure out how to be a business person and navigating that. And so I eventually was out at Standing Rock, and that changed my life. Was there for about 10 days, and around this time actually, yeah, and it was snowing. And then I met my Salmix Asa Wright, who's also an artist, Klamath Modoc artist. And Asa and I, Asa said, well, I'm here to put prayers down because we have to fight a pipeline in our homelands. And so that's what it took me out of Portland. I spent the last 5 years since Standing Rock fighting the Jordan Cove energy projects, which was a 230-mile LNG frac gas pipeline going from Malin, Oregon, which was right down here, to the Coos Bay. It would have gone under like 500 waterways. And it was terrifying. It was insane. It's an insane project, but we stopped it. So all that organizing actually came really into play in getting massive amounts of people and public comments out, and all of the state permits were denied. And so the Canadian frac gas pipeline can't go through. So that's kind of my story. It all merged, all the art and all the activism and organizing ended up coming together to be able to be like, shut down Canada, like what's going on right now, free Slato, Molly Wickham, what's happening up at Wet'suwet'en right now. We need to be in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en. I joined kind of the Black Snake Killers movement, and that's been my trajectory ever since. And now my activism, I'm on the board. I'm a board member with Rogue Climate, who is one of the main organizations that we work to stop this pipeline. And my work has shifted, and so what's happening is that since I started harvesting earth pigments, that's been this connection to land. And so the series is called Land Back. My tribe was terminated in 1954, so we don't have a reservation and a land base. So that's really is our focus right now, is we do want our land back. And because we had the bootleg fire this summer, our treaty lands are burning down. And I am a descendant of the 1864 treaty signers with my tribe. So, but my heart and soul, and it is a spiritual journey that took me back out to Pihimoha, which is Rotten Moon, which is a northern Paiute and western Shoshone homelands, which is just east of me. In northern Nevada and southern Oregon is the largest lithium deposits in North America. So we're fighting lithium wars and the water wars at the same time as we kill pipelines. So that's kind of my work, but like that art tent stuff at Standing Rock really came in handy. What we learned to be able to bring the creativity into the streets, into the bird dogging. So we showed up at Governor Brown's, fancy lunches, and we had big signs painted. And so we had to collaborate with a lot of artists to create a lot of art in the streets and at the Capitol. and it worked. So proud of that. But I could talk about this forever. I'm going to pass it over to Lynette.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your work, Ka'ila. I have a similar story. As artists, we carry so many roles, right? We have to take on so much, and being Indigenous and an Indigenous woman, we take on more roles too. It's always the story of walking in two worlds, right? The traditional and the contemporary. I got my art and my activism in a similar way too. I was a part of the Oak Flat movement, and which is happening in San Carlos, Arizona. We're fighting a copper mining against our ceremonial ancestral sacred area. We're fighting against Resolution Copper, who has been known to terrorize Native communities and commit atrocities and genocide in the name of copper. So that's what we've been fighting against for a long time now. And I got a part of the movement, and I was going to school for social work. And so both of them kind of informed each other, and social work helped me organize within the movement. And I've gotten to use my art within the movement to make the same thing, do art actions, banner drops, go into Washington and make stencils and, do all these crazy actions with my art when radical stuff, and that was my first point of using my art as a message, as a powerful tool to make change and social justice. And so I found that and the power of art within that and the movement. And I graduated from New Mexico Highlands University here in Albuquerque with my social work degree in 2016. And after that, that was right when Standing Rock was happening too. And so right after I graduated, I didn't have any obligations, and I went straight to Standing Rock, and I did 2 trips out there, and I stayed out there for 4 months, just helping support the Standing Rock tribe against the pipeline. And so that really gave me such amount of change and spiritual growth. And I also went to the art tents too, which is really cool. Remy, if you knew Remy, he was one of the main organizers at the tents. And so we got to use our art during that time as well. And so I always look back onto my social work practice and how crazy it was that it all kind of just meshed together, right? This art and social justice and this activism, and then you have like formal training and social work. And it was just this beautiful mix that somehow my paths had aligned and brought together. And so I have all these things under my belt, these tools that I can use that inform both worlds. And so in social justice, in social work, we're really taught to start with self-determination. That's a major philosophy in social work, is starting where the client is. And I feel like in my activism, that's a main thing of when you're coming into communities, you want to start where they are and what they need with. And another philosophy of social work is informed consent. And that has to do a lot with activism and social justice work. We need informed consent of what's happening and why they're drilling and what are the repercussions. And they need to have consultation with the tribes. And so a lot of these social work values expand into my activism, my artivism, and into mural work and public artwork in the public art realm. With murals, I carry those same social work values when I go into communities. It's really about being invited into the space, not coming in with a colonial mindset and saying, I'm going to paint this amazing whatever on their wall in this community. that has nothing to do with what's going on within the community, that isn't really relevant within that community or talks to anyone within that community. It may be nice, but I just like to work with communities a little more personably and to see what they want and what they need in my art and social justice when I'm working with murals. So I believe that in a beautiful way, it does definitely, one informs the other. And I believe that social work is, my training at least is continuing, and I put it into practice when I'm working in public art spaces. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And now it's mostly in the public art realm with murals.
Nice.
Okay, who hasn't gone?
Mia.
Yeah, your turn.
Um,
We keep ending with you, so you know I'm starting with you next.
okay, I'll get ready. So thinking of my artwork as activism is relatively a new concept for me. I've mostly thought of it more as raising awareness up until this point, which I guess is my activism. I grew up in Pennsylvania, actually really close to the Carlisle Indian School. My mother was a boarding school survivor, didn't grow up with any of her traditions. She was taken away from her parents when she was 4. So she can still understand Anishinaabemowin, but she can't speak it any longer. And she was really ashamed of her identity for a long time. So we would always go back to our reservation in Michigan and visit with family. And I went to college, an art college out in Pennsylvania, learned all the Western art history and techniques in the darkroom. That's where I got into the more experimental photographic techniques that I use now. And I started getting into fashion work because that's what I thought I wanted to do. And after about a year of doing that in Philadelphia, it just didn't have any meaning to me, and it felt meaningless to me. So I really just started looking very internally. I moved back to my reservation up in Michigan and lived with my uncle, who was the chairman of our tribe and a very, I would call him a very big activist for Indian country. He really fought for our sovereignty for our tribes and all the tribes in Michigan, and like our hunting and fishing rights. And just living with him really opened my eyes. I started going to ceremony, and I got my mom to come back, and it's really just been a very healing process for both of us, and being able to use my photography as a way to, I guess, express pride, appreciation of the beauty of not only my tribe, but the other tribes that I come across. I consider myself pretty nomadic. I travel as often as I'm able to. And I just like to think of my art as raising awareness that we're still here, we're still vibrant, we're not a dying culture, we're very diverse, and that's how I like to view my photography as. Hopefully people 200 years from now look at my photos and say, oh, that's what this tribe looked like, or this is how these people were living at this point in time, and that we're still here.
Yeah, I'd much rather them find your photos than a number of other white guys that we don't want to mention. I was thinking, yeah, my mother also went to residential schools, as we call them, in north of this border that crosses us. And she loved powwow, like when she came out, like, because it was pretty radical at the time, right? Like to even be so visible and to be doing all the things that have been banned in both of our countries, for us up until 1951, and I think for you guys it's also in the 50s that banning ended. And I just remember like taking a couple older artists, one of them, Robert Houle, who I'm doing a show with, to a powwow that me and a friend of mine had organized, a traditional one, not a competition one, not that it matters. I'm not judging anything. We can all do it all, in case people are sensitive. But just, they were standing, both of them were standing on the powwow grounds, and it was the kids came, the little jingle dress kids came out, and they both started to weep in this way that was just like, just struck my heart. And I really feel that when I look at your photos. I really feel that that's what you're kind of bringing out, is that sense of what some of us need to see in ourselves, and that kind of the beauty of the soul and the culture and all of those things. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about, one, your experimental techniques, mention what they are, and like, how does it help you tell that story? You know, the form help you tell those stories.
Sure. So I use a lot of in-camera techniques such as double exposure, which if I were to explain it, if you were to think of like a little disposable camera, if you were to take one photo, you know how you normally wind it? It's if you were to take two on top of each other without winding it. So it's done in camera, it's not photoshopped that way. So you don't really know what it's going to look like until after the fact, which is kind of the fun part. I really like experimenting with visual techniques like that. And I use that a lot with like my powwow photography to capture the kinetic energy that these dances have. And I like to use full color to really bring out the dancers' regalia, which a lot of, you know, time and effort and love has been put into them. It's not just like a costume or anything like that. Like you can just go buy. It's like sometimes like heirlooms passed down even, or made especially for that person. So when I think of like photos, or I don't have any photos of my ancestors, unfortunately, but when I think of them, how I think of them is in more of this kind of abstract way where I can see faces and I can feel them, and I can kind of feel their energy and see it, but it might not be just like a straight picture. That's why I use a lot of those layering techniques to kind of come across how I visualize and how I see these types of spaces and moments.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Speaking of layering, Kaila, your work also has that kind of quality to it. There's a sense of the embodiment of paint and color, but then there's text. And I'm wondering, are you wanting to strike after a message because you're, you know, so active in the community and so active everywhere? Or does art allow you to kind of, this layering allow you to create new meanings or go somewhere else with what you're wanting to dive into, whether it's land back or those kinds of words that appear in your work? Hopefully
Yeah,
that's
that's
not too weird of a question.
no, not at all. I'm definitely, my practice, how do I explain this? It's been like a journey of dealing with my own perfectionism, not wanting to like destroy my art. So I created, so I started working during these artist residencies. I had to produce a body of work in a month. So I just basically learned how to work. And another painter who I admire is James Lavador. And so visiting his studio, I really love seeing artists that are working in multiples. And then when you can, so I've been starting to hang my work kind of together. None of my smaller pieces were put into this exhibition, but I'll have like 9, you know, smaller paintings, and then that makes like a larger piece. So for me, that's been more of a narrative or a storytelling. And I'm also a poet and writer. I also do academic writing. So poetry, I liked the word I also listen to a lot of music. So like John Trudell and the Tribe Called Red. I had a whole show called like Alienation, Alienation. And the scrawling in the text, it's becoming performative, I guess, is my painting practice. So I'm working on a lot of pieces at once. And I'll just start with the layers. So one day, it's just painterly marks, grays. And then like with this series, it's all stencils from detritus that I found on the land. And so I'll just and that's kind of the graffiti element. So street art and graffiti element, and the reference to petroglyphs is definitely like a comparison or something I'd want people to be kind of thinking about. But really it's each piece, then I'm formally, conceptually, I'm composing, right? So each piece kind of starts to become its own painting and piece. And then that's when for me, the piece No Man Camps Missing Her is the first large piece I made out of that whole series. And it was really right in the midst of the fighting the Jordan Cove pipeline. So it has the no LNG text in there. The white functions as kind of a reference to white supremacy, erasure, and note-taking. So it's also because I take a lot of notes. So there's this aesthetic of wanting to bring in my sketchbook into my work. But really kind of the meaning of the text is usually the last thing to come in. And so I work on many pieces that it's just it's a painterly technique thing that I do so that I'm not destroying my own work, if that makes sense. So I'll have to do something and I'll leave it for, weeks, and then I'll come back in, and then I'm able to be oh, okay, this is what's working. So my process is working, my goal was to make 55 paintings. I made 27 in the last 3 years. And now I have those gold. I'm going to continue to do the Land Back series, but really I brought earth lithium from Pihumaha, and it's going to be in my studio. So that's kind of where that is. So for me now, the conceptual, it's taken a long time to get to that place, but conceptual, it is starting at the beginning, but kind of yeah, it's a tricky thing. Let me say, okay, I'm going to quote one of the painters. I am very influenced by the German expressionists and kind of the post-World War II, what was happening in painting and art in Europe after World War II is inspiration to me. I consider myself a wartime artist. I believe that we've been in the Indian Wars. We still have been in the Indian Wars. And so being a wartime artist in my work is researching war. And at this moment, it's researching torture and the torture program that was created in 2003. So for me, the academic research and then the painting process, the painting for me is healing, and I do it for myself. And then whatever meanings and stuff comes out of it, and what other people see in it, I gain a lot out of that. But it's definitely a mental health process for me to just get to express myself, basically. But mentioning that torture program, just want to bring it up because it's linked to the activism work. The Modoc war leaders from the late 1800s were lynched. 4 of them were lynched at Fort Klamath. And my great grandmother Emma Ball was 9 years old and was forced to watch the lynching. So that was what was happening. And that lynching of the Modoc war leaders is the legal precedent that John C. Yu, George W. Bush's lawyer, legal person, put into place as the legal precedent for creating the torture program in 2003 so Guantanamo Bay was open. So in that painting, Torture State, that's what that painting is about. It's referencing that the state can kill Indians because basically that's where the term terrorist comes from in the United States identity as a sovereign nation. So I'm really wanting to bring that kind of message out. And so it's really tricky to figure out how to do that through academic writing, poetry, and then also, painting in an abstract form. I think that was a really long way of possibly answering that question.
No, it's actually perfect. I think actually you are achieving it through your process. It's your process actually leading you in the right way to actually express those things, because it's very complex, these histories. Yeah,
and I think this element of violence or the violence on the land and the violence on the bodies is something that's important in this work, is kind of making that link. And I was actually, there's this incredible show that Pica brought 3 years ago to Portland at Pica. They created a whole gallery for it, but it was these Aboriginal, elder Aboriginal painters. And the way they talk about their paintings, they were the kind of the shaman and the leaders of their clans. And they started painting and they talked about their paintings as the land, knowing the stories and like how do you, and so that was really important to me. And so in bringing in the pigments, it's like there is this representation of the land and the body, and we are stardust, you know, we're made up of everything that's in the stars and of the earth. So
Like my favorite thought.
thanks for the question.
I was hearing today too that because I learn every day, but when we want to understand, and this relates to something you were saying earlier, Lynette, thinking about the intersection of social work and art. When we want to understand something like the cosmos, we actually turn inward. So we go, at least for Anishinaabe, anyway, we turn inward because the cosmos is inside as much as it is outside. So anyway, we are stardust. So Lynette, I was thinking also, dovetails really nicely because one of your, you know, I found it interesting, like muralist Lynette, but you are an artist in multiple forms, but murals are one of your main formats. And it comes out of revolution. It comes out of, like, I think about the Mexico and the muralists of the revolutions. And I think about in Toronto, majority of the Indigenous art is murals. What is that for you to want to work outside in the streets? And then how do you relate to site? What is like one of your favorite kind of sites where you've done a project?
Right. Yeah. Murals, the history of murals, you know, they're very powerful. They get the message accessible to the public. And, you know, the Chicano art movement, you know, they've revolutionized. It's been used to inspire and create revolutionaries. And I feel like I kind of would like to do the same, you know, and using my murals to access the public. And that's what I love about public art, especially murals, is it's so accessible to the people, specifically the community and the site where I'm creating, but also, you know, just, you know, how people are just, they're reluctant to go into institutions and galleries, and like we were talking earlier, it's an unknown. It can be uncomfortable for some people, and so that's why I really love working in murals, because it makes it so accessible to everyone, and the message is right there if you so choose to use it in that way. I really like to work site specifically. All of my mural designs are created for the site and the communities around. I don't create something and then just go on, put it on a wall. One particular mural that was, I would say, of importance for the site was I created a mural at IAIA Machna in Santa Fe, and it was following the Abolish the Entrada movement that we had here in New Mexico. And it was a huge movement that gained national recognition. And it had been going on for a long time, but this was a big moment for Native organizers here in the Southwest, because we live in Pueblo territory here in Albuquerque. And the history of the Entrada is basically in towns in New Mexico, we have these little plazas in the middle of these towns. And, you know, it's just a plaza with a stage. But historically, these plazas were used to actually hang our warriors, our medicine people during the Pueblo Revolt. And now they have these statues of conquistadors or an obelisk that celebrates that genocidal history. And so the Entrada was a part of this fiesta annually that they have all over New Mexico, but this one was specifically in Santa Fe. And it's basically, the Entrada is a reenactment of the Pueblo and the Hispanic communities coming together in a peaceful reconciliation, which never really happened. Basically, it's a reenactment, a revisionist history, as we like to call it, of basically portraying the peaceful native. They actually have a guy dressed up in red face paint playing the native, and it's a play, and they go and shake the conquistador's hand. So it's very offensive, right? And they still have that happening. So a lot of women-led Pueblo revolutionaries, matriarchs organized for a good 3 years, and this has been going on forever. But recently, within the 3 years, they really organized and started doing marches here in Santa Fe. And we're getting a lot of pushback from the Hispanic communities here, and especially the mayor of Santa Fe. And fortunately, they did abolish the Entrada, which was a great victory for us out here in the Southwest. We no longer have to see those displays of celebrating genocide here. But it wasn't without a price. Like most things that come with change, it happened because of violence. The Native women organizers were brutally assaulted by the Santa Fe, New Mexico police, brought in by the mayor. And so because they were brutalized, it was captured on social media and the newspapers. And that was a bad look for a Santa Fe and Santa Fe mayor to see these police brutalizing these Native women organizers who were dressed traditionally. And so that what was a big point, what led to the abolishment of the Entrada. And so it's kind of been swept under the rug, but there's also a big movement, underground movement from the Hispanic community to keep it going. And so the fight isn't over here as it is everywhere. But after that movement, I created a mural at the Santa Fe IAIA Museum, and it had to do with the abolishing the Entrada movement and that specific moment right before the police and the Native women organizers faced off and that brutality happened. It was like that moment where the front line of Native women organizers faced off of the modern day conquistadors, upholding this police brutality and colonialism. And so I did that mural in that space of Santa Fe, the capital of Native arts and exploitation of Native arts and people in Santa Fe, in the plaza. And so if you're familiar with Santa Fe, there's a bunch of galleries that sell Native art, what they call Native art knockoffs as well. And just to do a mural and put Native women, organizers and activists fighting for their rights in these walls 100 feet from the plaza where they hung our Native men and our medicine people was an act of decolonization, was an act of rematriating the space. It was an act and a statement of saying we're still here. And so in that way, my murals are an act of decolonization. And seeing these representations of large scale women, Native women, matriarchs, and leaders in public spaces is so important for representation and Native people to see us and for other people to see us that we're still here. So in that way, my Portland art mural, as you'll see in the exhibition, is also an act of decolonization and rematriation of space, because historically, Portland Art Museum is an institution with its own history. And so that's what I love about our exhibition, is that we are all becoming our own matriarchs to our communities. And so with us being in the space of Portland Art Museum, it is a rematriation of space. And so my mural is an honor to reflect us and the matriarchs that we become, with this huge figure of an Apache woman in large scale looking down and protecting us and representing us in that colonial institution.
Beautiful, thank you. There's only 2 questions in the Q&A, so and they're more general, so I'm just letting people know to pop questions in there if you can. But I want to ask one more question that's very specific to your work before we jump into the more general questions again. But Lehua Wakea, Kaya, I was thinking, your work is so beautifully layered in terms of materials, and they're evocative. And I think some of what you're trying to say, you say through the material choices that you make. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about mesh and how you chose what kinds of materials you're working with, how do they come in your possession, you know, all of those things. How does it matter, all of these things, to what you're creating, and how do you make choices?
Yeah, I see my work, my practice as a whole, as a practice rooted in resilience and reclamation of processes and ways of working and relationships that were they tried to steal from us and strip from us. Starting in the 1800s with the coming of the missionaries in the 1820s to the Hawaiian Islands, the practice of making kapa was almost eradicated entirely. So whereas before we had women in every family making kapa almost every day, as soon as they were able enough to, it was almost to the point where no families were doing it by the mid 1800s. And so I'm probably the first kapa maker in my family line for at least 7 generations, possibly more. But my work doesn't just stop at reclaiming this ancestral cloth. It's guided me to speaking my language again, to dancing again, dancing hula, learning more about my roots, and also tying me more to issues going on back home, such as Mauna Kea, which is my home mountain. And for any of you who are familiar, there's a huge controversy still going on, has been for the last over a decade, really. But TMT, or the 30-meter telescope, which is slated to be the largest telescope in the world, proposed to be constructed on top of our most sacred mountain. And this is the mountain that I grew up, you know, sharing a backyard with, and seeing it every day. And so, you know, bringing that into my work as well, and kind of reclaiming so many different parts of myself, reclaiming that land and those issues for my community, is something that I also represent in my work. And so you kind of talked about making choices, like why I make the choices I do or how I do. That's like a huge part of why I do what I do, is not for myself, but more for my family and my community and those who gave me life and continue to support me. And I want to reciprocate that back. And in order to do that with the art choices that I'm making today, I'm reclaiming a lot of the ancestral patterns and ways that we view the environment to make patterns. And so oftentimes it won't be as overt as, you know, like writing directly in a piece, like this is what this is about. It's more represented indirectly by the reclamation of symbols and patterns that we use in our tattoos, our kapa, and our other aspects of our material culture. And a lot of times these meanings were taken away from us. They were appropriated in Western textiles in the 1800s. And so just to be able to reclaim those back and use them to tell my own stories and to tell stories of my own people today, and fix that in a contemporary context, I think is really powerful, and it helps reclaim the narrative for us Hawaiian people who have often been completely written out of the story. So the materials that I choose are also really important. Like Kaila's work, the pigments kind of serve as another form of connecting to ancestry, connecting to land, connecting to where I'm from, and they all tell their own stories as well. So the pigments that I use in this work, all the works in Mesh, I've collected and processed myself, and I think that's rooted me in this place. But also the patterns that I'm using are specifically tied to my family lineage and patterns that are directly applicable from my material culture as a whole. So yeah, it's, you know, it's carrying on this lineage that was almost broken, that was almost taken from us, but it goes much more beyond kapa. It's language, it's revitalization, it's learning how our families related to each other, it's learning about ancestral foods. It's so much more than just art, and I think that all feeds back into the work that I do in one way or another.
You're all incredibly inspiring. I will turn to the audience for our last question of the evening. And this person wants to know how you feel being in a contemporary art institution and navigating that. And do you feel that you have to change or tone down your work to be shown in more formal spaces? To me, you seem all very kind of hardcore and strong, so but we still, you know, have to address these institutions in certain ways. So maybe you could speak to that. Let's start with you, Leah.
Sorry, I had myself muted.
I know I keep muting and unmuting myself at weird moments, but then I hate the mute button because then you can't see me, you can't hear me laughing or enjoying what you're saying or like responding emotionally. I hate the mute button anyways.
I've actually found that I've done the opposite as far as toning things down. I feel like the more I've tried experimenting with these photographic techniques and speaking more to my own culture, my work has been getting more recognized in that way. And it's actually been super exciting navigating this whole experience as emerging artist and getting my work out there, and work that I'm really proud of to show and talk about. It's I see it as, it's not a traditional native art form, but it is in a way that I can still tell our stories and share our stories in that way. So yeah.
So we'll circle around. Lynette, do you want to go? And then you choose the next.
All right. Yeah, navigating art institutions and institutions in general as a Native person. Institutions, yeah, historically, you know, they haven't been good to us. So it's very sensitive, you know. We're barely getting our artifacts back from museums and institutions across the world. You know, there's change happening for sure. It's a fine line, you know. You got to navigate it smart and sensitively, but courageously too. You know, sometimes you got to be the first out there to do these radical pieces, and sometimes take the hit so you can open the door for more, you know. And that's just kind of what happens. And I found it both hard and very welcoming, working with institutions and art institutions. You know, some are ready, some are not, to bring Native people representation and what we represent into their spaces. And like I said, we're decolonizing these spaces. We're holding the door open for more, and representation matters, you know, in all levels, wherever we're at, from organizing to activism to art to being in these institutions, but you know, also on all levels of curation to directors to artists. You know, we need it on all levels. And I think it's really beautiful when we do have good representation out there, you know. Just being in the public art, I'll just tell a real story about representation and public art and being out there, of why it's important to me and the effects of how it's been on me. When I was little, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and you know how hot it is out there. And so I remember we were always walking around downtown Phoenix on hitting that hot pavement, going to the bus stop with my mom or my dad. And we would be downtown Phoenix, and there would be all these buildings, high rises and sky rises and banks and institutions. And my dad would always show me this sculpture that was made by Chiricahua Apache sculpture, famous artist. And he was also my relative. And he would say, look at that. And it was a sculpture, a bronze sculpture, really huge bronze sculpture of Apache man, Apache woman, and a baby in a cradle board. And he said, look at that. He's like, that's your uncle. He was like, be proud of who you are. Those are Apache people. That's your people. And I would look at that all the time when we would be downtown, and, you know, and that stuck with me, because just seeing that representation out in the public of my Apache people was very important, because to me, when I was small, that brown statue and that Apache family looked as big, from my point of view, it looked as big as those institutions and those skyscrapers and those banks, those institutions that tried to wipe us out. So that was that representation of that we're still here, we're still proud, we're living as a contemporary Native people. And so that stuck with me about being proud of who I am, but also in some way informed me of how to use my art to empower. So I kind of try to go into these institutions in that way of trying to find some way to use it as a message, and navigating is here or there. It can be good, it can be bad. I've had different experiences. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about that. Let me hear from Lehua Kea.
Okay. Yeah, I think my form of kind of resisting the desire for me to tone down my work is a little bit more subtle. I used to provide translations for all of my pieces, and a lot of them were titled in Olelo Hawaii, Native Hawaiian. But in the last couple of years, I've stopped doing the translation, and I think it's empowering for Kanaka Oiwi, for Native Hawaiians, to take back their language. Our language was legally banned, like on the books, until 1986, which is crazy to me, because that's a year after my parents graduated from high school. And so when I'm doing this work, I think a lot about my great grandma Kumu, who was pure Hawaiian on my dad's side, and she was one of the last 1,000 native fluent speakers of Hawaiian. And her generation was kind of the last generation to speak Hawaiian fluently, and they were stigmatized and assimilated to not teach it to their kids. There was fear of being physically punished especially for their kids who would speak Hawaiian in schools. They would get beaten, they would get their mouths washed out with soap, and you know, just a lot of shame for being just Hawaiian, even if you weren't speaking it. So they, you know, people like my great grandma Kumu, she didn't want her son, my grandfather, to go through the same kinds of things. So that language was really wiped out really quickly. And part of the reclamation that I was kind of talking about earlier is taking that language back, taking the power back through our language, because our language tells stories. It is literally the land speaking through us. And I think that's really powerful to bring that into such a colonized space like the museum, and museums and institutions as a whole. And to say, you know, I have the power, the agency to decide who gets the translation of this work and who doesn't. And that doesn't necessarily mean that my pieces aren't accessible to all audiences. It just means that, you know, we're acknowledging that so much was taken from us, so much was stripped from our culture, and we weren't allowed to practice for generations. And I think there's a lot of power and authority in deciding what to share, what gets shared, and what gets kept within our communities. So I think that's a little bit of what I've been navigating in the last couple of years. I will pass it to, did Leah go for this question yet? Okay. Kaila then.
Yeah, I think I'm last. Hey, Steph, thanks for the question. Okay, this is a tricky one for me to answer. My work is very layered. My activism work is layered, and it is all layered and complicated right now with me personally, with social media and with institutions, not just art institutions. So I mentioned that, you know, we'd been fighting a pipeline. I could talk a lot about the Portland Art Museum, my relationship with galleries and museums, but like I said, when I got out of graduate school, being a PNCA student, the Pacific Northwest College of Art used to be in the museum. So when I moved to Portland at age 18, I could go there for free. So I spent a lot of time at that museum. Like when I said in one of my posts, like I've had a 20-year relationship with this museum. It is that. And so I've never been somebody that would tone down anything. And actually I use that strategy all the time. And usually it ends up, I get a promotion or something when I'm like, I'm quit, I'm out. So I've always been that way with my work in general. But for me, it's been tricky because I think you know, like in it, doing the work, making the paintings, getting it out there. I do a lot of self-curated exhibitions. So basically I wasn't really down with that little space, the little closet gallery that was the contemporary space in the museum. Yeah, so I was like, I had sent a proposal to that, but it was like to kind of block off that space and then put our art all around the museum. Because I was like trying to get out of like the Native American gallery, basically. So my piece After Boarding School in Mourning is on view in the Lillian Pitt exhibition. And then my other painting, which was 2011, so it's portraiture. So I've now, you know, moved into abstraction. When I first started going to school, I was like, okay, I could go to Santa Fe and do this whole thing. You know, I was always questioning, like, what does Indian art look like? What does Native art look like? And so I always wanted to be free, though, to paint however I wanted, that full expression. You know, I didn't want to get locked into that. So that was something I've always navigated. So I spent a lot of work just, you know, experimenting, you know, finding my language, finding my visual language. And so for me, that's the most important thing. I'm really thrilled to be selected as one of the artists to be in that space and to be in this dialogue with all of you. But it has been really tricky for me because of my extensive work and presence and being a spokesperson and singer and showing up, you know, on the front lines for a lot of these fights. And so what I've been dealing with also is that we've had, and this is what I'm, I was planning on reading it, but basically Jordan Cove is owned by Pembina, a Canadian corporation, and they had so much money and power in the state of Oregon. I think it was spending like $10 million a month on propaganda. So I was fighting a narrative. And what we're finding out now, though, is that they're called these fusion centers. So after 9/11, they've been a war on terror, and now they're moving home to this domestic terrorism. So environmental activists and tribal activists, they're wanting to put these labels on us. So apparently this company has had a fusion center here in Oregon called Titan, which stands for the Terrorism Intelligence and Threat Assessment Network. And they were surveilling us. And so I don't know what that means, but it's been really hard to be like launching as an artist while also being under that level. And at first it's like you kind of had a sense, but it's like basically the FBI, the state of the Oregon state police created this thing called Southern Oregon Joint Task Force, and they were monitoring Jordan Cove pipeline activists very specifically. And so this journalist Will Parrish has written a couple articles in The Guardian. I just posted one. It was from a couple years ago, but I actually hadn't seen that, so that's why I posted that on my social media. But anyways, it's kind of this navigating, so it's like. And then I was offered the governor's show to show my artwork in the governor's show. And the only reason I said yes is so that I could deny it, because our governor was, her office, it's ugly. Like, I don't want to hang my work in her office. So I accepted the show and then I denied it very publicly. And so that was kind of part of my work that was in the Portland Biennial at Disjecta before it used to be Disjecta, now it's Oregon Contemporary. So, but that didn't, the newspapers, I'm always trying to be subtle, but then it doesn't necessarily always land. I don't think people realize that like my work in that show also linked with that letter I wrote denying my show to the governor, which is on my website. So, and with that, I submitted that letter to the Oregonian by myself, and they did not accept it or publish it. I had to have a journalist friend who's a white woman, Emma Marison, who is a what do you call it? Not ally, accomplice. Emma has been really awesome, and she submitted it for me, and that's when they published that. So that's kind of the level of stuff I'm navigating. Is I'm also in that book for the Opacity of Performance, which is a performance for my friend Taka Hiro Yamamoto, which will be opening early January 2022, which I'm really excited about. And so I submitted 3 of my paintings and a poem for that publication. And what was I going to say? Yeah, anyways, so like, it's like the concept kind of the opacity of performance, and Taka, we were talking a lot about invisibility and visibility, and I think that's what that performance piece is really going to be exploring. I don't want to say any, I don't really know, but I'm really excited that I have prints and a poem in that book, and it will be kind of at the same time. Me and Taka's work will be on view at the same time in the Portland Art Museum. So yeah, it's been kind of a whole 20 years of trying to figure out visibility, invisibility, where you show your spaces, or where you show your work. And so I guess I'll follow up. I worked with the High Desert Museum a couple of years ago, and that museum won an award actually for that exhibition. It was called Water in the West. And so like, this is like museums with really funky collections. And but I think decolonizing the museum is actually like, I'm engaged in it. It's like, it's problematic. And so I'm working with the Fable Museum, which is this museum in Klamath Falls. And it's really the only art space in Klamath Falls for next year. And I'm really designing the exhibition around education and getting youth to come in. So really kind of crafting these educational, curations. And I told them, because they have this really ugly orange carpet, I was like, you need to get a contemporary gallery space. So they've been fundraising all year actually. And they're going to do it starting soon to put in some new walls. So, it's kind of like, that's kind of how I use my practice to also educate and to answer somebody else's question. Like they asked it because I live in like a conservative area, and like, how does that impact my work? And I said, really, for me, it really just inspires me more to want to use my practice and my mentorship and my and the artwork and get it on view for people, because nobody in my community can see my art, or unless I don't know if they're going to Portland Art Museum or to Bend. So I'm really wanting to bring my work home to my community, and not just tribal community, for everyone. So that's sort of, I like use that tension for educational purposes as well. I'm gonna stop talking.
So we all have these deep, complex histories with institutions. That's never a simple question, even though it sounds like one. Just to mention one institution that was important for tonight, I think you all did a mentorship with the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation program for artist mentors, and they also funded the exhibition. So we just want to shout out to them. Sometimes institutions do good things. And it
Here's
brings us, we literally started with mentor and we end with the word mentor, which I kind of like.
This is my mentor's cup.
Nice.
from 8th generation, so you can get your carving paddle.
But you did mention opacity, and that comes from Edward Glissant's The Right to Opacity. And this notion that, you know, whenever they talk about Indianness or Blackness or whatever, this desire to understand, to be transparent, it actually just pigeonholes us and holds us in a space that has nothing to do with us, right? So I think that all of your work in this really incredible way, by centering our ways of being, by centering our languages, by centering our communities, what matters to us, the earth, our kinship systems, our ways of loving and being together. I think this is actually how we practice that right. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you everybody else. Miigwech, miigwech, miigwech to everybody who's listening. And I want to say good night.
Thank you. It was so nice to meet you, Wanda, and
It was
all of
so
the
nice.
other artists.
I know, I hope we get to smooch each other, and well, okay, that's way too much, but you know, just a little bit of hugging or something soon in person.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone. Thank you especially to Kathleen. Thank you for curating this show and bringing us all together. I really appreciate your work and where you're going and what you're doing. And thank you, Wanda. Thank you, Jaleesa. I can't wait to connect with all of you ladies in real life too, especially when it's safe. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Miigwech.
Yes, and make sure to come and see the show. If you're in Portland, we have a nice long run. We'll be open until May 8th of 2022. So thank you all for joining us tonight and giving us just a glimpse of what you're doing, and much respect for the work you're doing for the greater good of your communities. Thank you all. Thanks, Wanda.